during this time, I was still showing up. I was still serving clients on coaching calls, going on stories and being online and putting on this brave face. But behind the scenes, no one actually knew that I was at a hospital between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. with my dad, filming my stories on lunch breaks at the hospital canteen, doing my coaching sessions when I got home, because most of my clients are in Europe. So like the time zone
Mm.
matched up, but most of my coaching sessions were like 8, 9 p.m., 7 p.m. I'd come back to hospital accommodation. I was living in hospital accommodation with my mother, which is a thing in and of itself. But
Mm.
in this experience where we were caring for my dad in not ideal situations, but I was showing up for my business. And on one side, I think I think this isn't talked about enough, like how much life happens in and around our businesses.
I'm your host, Tiffany Gilliland, an Australian business and mindset coach with 10 years' experience in online marketing and the creator of the Business Bravery framework. I help coaches to be brave so you can sign more clients, even if you hate marketing and sales feel icky. From signing your next paying clients through to launching that dream group coaching program, the Business Bravery framework helps you take bigger leaps without the mindset spirals. It's helped my clients double their investment in me, make thousands of dollars, and truly build their dream business. In this episode, I had the pleasure of chatting with Helen Kartika, a business and mindset coach passionate about supporting female founders in confidently marketing themselves online. Through her coaching practice, she empowers her clients to hone their self-leadership and build wildly fulfilling businesses that defy the status quo of what a traditional professional path looks like. With that said, this is an amazing episode, and I can't wait to share with you Helen's stories of business bravery, past, present, and future. Now, who's ready for some business bravery inspiration? Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here with the amazing Helen Kartika, who is a business and mindset coach. You've heard all of the goodness already. Thank you so much, Helen, for being here and sharing your stories of bravery, past, present, and future. Tell us about you and your business and what brave things you have going on at the moment.
Amazing. Thank you so much, first of all, Tiffany, for having me. Really, I think business overall is just to be in business, you have to be brave and you have to be courageous. So I absolutely love the concept of this podcast. And obviously, as you know, I'm a big fan of you as well. So very happy to be here. But yes, I am a business and mindset coach, much like yourself, as you mentioned. And I've also got 10 years of experience behind me as well. And I suppose it might be a little bit helpful to share a little bit about my background and what got me here to being a coach today, to supporting female entrepreneurs. And that is essentially my career started 10 years ago in corporate. Much like many other people, I had like that dream job. I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was based in London at the time. Everything, like all the boxes were ticked. And, I I had that path in front of me that, yeah, like was kind of like set out. And I had a great team. Everything was going well, but I just started to feel really what I call like spiritually burnt out. Like everything was going great in my work and my career, but I just kept thinking, like, is this all life has to offer? And I was like, at the time, working at a huge agency in London, and I was doing the social media for Netflix at the time. So I was part of a team where we were like literally managing online social communities of millions of people. And whilst that was fun, I just kept thinking to myself, like, there needs to be more. And so that's when I kind of started my journey of wanting to, I wouldn't say like I wanted to start a business. I actually started a business because I wanted to create more flexibility and freedom in my life to actually find what I wanted to do. So a friend of mine at the time said, "Hey, like you've got all these marketing and social media skills. Why don't you just start your own business? Like, why don't you just do marketing for other people instead of like doing it for this huge company?" And I thought, oh my God, that sounds so cool. And maybe Tiffany, you have like a similar experience of like you starting your own business as well. And so I started doing that. And what I found was that I was more burnt out than ever because I'd started that business, which was a marketing consultancy, which I no longer do anymore. I'm a full-time coach now. But when I started that business, because I was wearing all the hats, I realized that it was way more harder than I initially thought. And so I burned out again, even worse than I did in corporate. And I was like, hey, you know, I've burnt out again. Like, maybe it's just me. Like, maybe something's going on here. Maybe it's not the work I'm doing. Maybe it's not the industry I'm in. And I'm searching for all these like external answers. Maybe it's just me that I need to like figure out. So that's when I went on this journey to become a coach. And I started off as a life coach. And then a couple of years into life coaching and figuring out like why I was burning out and wanting to support other women who were going through the same. A bunch of my life coaching clients actually said, hey, you have all this marketing experience, you've run a marketing consulting business before, can you start coaching us and our businesses? So that's how I kind of like pivoted from like life coaching and mindset coaching now into business and mindset coaching. So I know that that is a very long-winded answer to your question, but that's basically what I do. That's what's led me here on this journey. And yeah, basically support other kind of coaches, online experts looking to start and grow their coaching businesses as well. That's a bit about my background. I guess to share about the bravery aspect, or
Yeah.
did you have any questions on that actually? I'll let you interject there because I'm talking too much.
Uh, no, that's okay. I mean, yeah, like I love your story. It's actually quite similar to mine, although for me, I didn't necessarily work in corporate. I worked for government and nonprofit,
Yeah.
but in marketing, and then, had a business, built a business on the side. But yeah, like definitely your stories of the burnout and then the eventual, hey, maybe this is me. Yeah, I think like it took me far longer to kind of come to grips with some of that. And definitely, like, I know you've got a bravery story that you want to tell that could take us in a different direction, but I hope that we'll get to maybe come back to some of that you experienced, just because like definitely definitely for me it's like, even now, like I know and I can prevent some burnouts, but it still kind of ends up happening a bit to me, if that makes sense. Like it's not as severe as the first time when it was like, oh, I can't do anything, don't ask me to do anything, don't ask me to go to the
Yeah.
shops. Yeah, whereas now it's like, oh, I can still work through it, but it's just I definitely feel a sense of exhaustion and maybe a sense of perhaps not as excited about tasks that I usually would be. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it shows up in different ways as well. Like, yeah, before it used to be like, okay, I'm out, I can't do anything, I need to take like 3 weeks off of work. And now it shows up in kind of this like, when you're not enjoying your work or when you're dreading doing something or you're procrastinating and you're like, hey, like why is this not as enjoyable as it usually is? And like I think when I start to like lose that kind of sparkly energy in my business, when there's things that I don't want to do, sometimes it's just things I don't want to do, but sometimes I'm like, hey, maybe I need like a little bit of a break or a reset. So I think like if you have experienced burnout, and I know that term gets thrown around a lot, but I know from your experience and even mine, like it literally was a severe burnout where I could barely function at one point, but now it shows up in different ways where, you need to be very conscious of like not overcommitting to things, and like it can kind of hold you back in other ways as well, especially if you're very, very like ambitious and you're a go-getter. It kind of shows up in these insidious ways in your business.
Yeah, definitely has been my experience, that whole like, yeah, how it can show up in things that I know for me, I definitely have a tendency of like, I'm willing to work hard for my dreams. I can just keep working harder, but like at some point it's like I had to learn to work smarter. So anyway, I know
So
you have stories of bravery and some brave stuff that you're doing. So I don't want to hijack. I know we actually have a plan. So yeah, tell us tell us the brave things that you have been
yeah.
working on in your business at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess first of all, when I was reflecting on the brave things that I was doing in my business ahead of this conversation, I was like, you know what, Helen, I am really not doing anything brave at all. Like, of course, my business is fun, it's exciting, but you know what? I've been in business full time for 6 years now. Like, things are scary, there's challenges, but like, I think I'm just like ticking along in a good way. So I was actually like, I don't know if I can answer this question for Tiff, but you know what? Like the question came at a really good moment and time in my life, because it did make me reflect. Like, it's a really good reflective question. Like, anyone listening and who loves this podcast, like, journal on it. Like, what are you doing that's brave right now? Because I think so many of us dismiss, like, just how much we are doing, right? Like, we dismiss just how courageous we are being, or we're desensitized to it because we're freaking women in business and we're doing brave things all the time, right? So I had to actually sit and reflect on this question. So I had some substance to bring to this podcast. But I had actually realized, I'm in a season of my life where my life has been quite challenging, and I have been able to navigate business and running my business and serving clients and signing clients in and around that, and to share a little bit about what has been happening and what that looks like. Sadly, 3 months ago, I lost my father, who I was very, very close to. He had cancer. He was in remission for 18 months, and then it unexpectedly came back. So my family and I originally from Australia, but I live overseas in Europe. Luckily, I was in Australia at the time on an extended visit, but it all came as a bit of a surprise to us. Obviously, like, when something like this comes back, it's never it's never good news. And we found out that he had the cancer. He had like a kind of, I'm going into details here, but he had a year-long prognosis, but he unfortunately left us much, much sooner than that. And it got very, very serious very quickly. And what that meant was essentially, dropping everything, moving to the countryside where my parents, and basically just caring for him while he was in hospital. He had a lot of things going on where he required kind of family there by his sides all day, like, every day for around 4 to 6 weeks. And this was, yeah, I guess, like, the I guess the thing about it was, during this time I was still showing up in my business. I was still serving clients on coaching calls. I was still, going on stories and being online and putting on this brave face. But behind the scenes, no one actually knew that I was at a hospital between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. with my dad, filming my stories on lunch breaks at the hospital canteen, and doing my coaching sessions when I got home, because most of my clients are in Europe. So, like, the time zone matched up, but most of my coaching sessions were like 8, 9 p.m., 7 p.m., and I'd come home, I'd come back to, not home actually, it was hospital accommodation. I was living in hospital accommodation with my mother, which is a thing in and of itself. But, like, I was, like, in this experience where we were caring for my dad, like, in not ideal situations, but I was showing up for my business. And on one side, I think, like, I think this isn't talked about enough, like, how much life happens in and around our businesses. I think when you're in corporate, and you experience like loss, or something happens in your personal life, it's like, everyone, like, you take time off, and to an extent, like, your colleagues, your team, your boss, people might know, and it's like, there's an understanding. You take that time off, you do what you need to do. But for me at this point, like, I had to keep showing up for my business. And obviously, when my dad passed, there was that lead up where, of course, like, I had to cancel, reschedule my calls. All my clients were amazing and they understood. But in that, like, build up, it was just, I couldn't, you just show up. You show up online, and, like, no one is none the wiser. And on one hand, I think, like, I'm so grateful for my business that I literally could drop everything, like, I was based in Sydney at the time. And, my uncle called me and he was like, hey, I think we need you here. And, I was there the next day because I had the flexibility. I didn't have to ask for time off. I didn't worry about my income or anything like that. I had recurring income in my business. So I was like, you know what? If I do have to scale back and only work a couple of hours a day in the stolen moments of a lunch break or late at night, like, I can do that because I've built this amazing business behind me, right? So at one part, I'm really grateful that I had that. But on the other hand, it was just like, just lifing around you, you know? And I think like in business, like this idea of like, you know, we're navigating so much, like especially as women, we have so much on our plates, but like just this idea of like navigating grief and loss. I think through this process, I've really understood really what that means. And it's not even grief of like a loved one passing. It's the greatest heartbreak and grief I've ever felt in my life. But we're always grieving things all the time, right? Like we grieve, you know, the loss of a season in our life, or we grieve relationships that aren't aligned to us anymore. We grieve past versions of ourselves and past identities of ourselves, right? Like there is so much grief and loss in life because it's ever evolving and changing and dynamic. And I think, yeah, just like in business, I just think it's such a funny thing, especially if you're a coach or consultant. You're showing up online, and most of us are only sharing the bad stuff that's going on. I know social media things are shifting, and that like people are showing up, trying to show up a little bit more like raw and authentic and things like that. But I think when it comes to the personal stuff, we're not sharing that in the moment, right? Because it's personal, it's private. We don't want to be an emotional mess when we're on our stories or on lives. So I
Mm.
think like it is this weird ass thing where we're showing up in such a way, but no one really knows what's
Mm.
going on behind the scenes. And I think that's a brave thing, all of us, like no matter what you're experiencing in life, whether it's grief or loss or any other challenges or hurt or pain that you're feeling, it's freaking brave that you're still showing up for your business and for your clients, because a lot of people wouldn't. And I also think this is why you need to be so brave in business. Like I was, you know, I had my past corporate life, but I just think being in business, as I said earlier, it's hard in and of itself. It has its own uncertainties. It's all you. If you're not working, if you're not doing the thing, nothing happens. So I think like to still be able to show up in that, even during like challenge and difficulty in your life, takes a lot of courage, right? Because you're
Yeah,
doing a really
absolutely.
hard thing as it
Yes.
is, and to navigate that around everything else, it just, yeah, it just adds to that challenge, I guess.
Mm. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So first up, I want to say like thank you for the depth of everything that you shared just now. And especially like at the beginning when you said, hey, I had to think about what brave things I'm doing. Because I know like a lot of people who I talk to, the question catches them off guard. Some of them are like, oh, I'm not sure I'm doing anything brave. And like you said, it can just be this thing that we do. Like this is one of the things that I love about bravery, because sometimes the brave thing is sending the awkward email that you don't want to send, or having that awkward conversation or something like that. And yet other times it's the bigger stuff, like handling this work life stuff, which in my own experience, like my father passed away, although well over a decade now, but again, from cancer. I was in a job at the time, so I was able to take a back seat from that job. However, like, yeah, how did you find that balance, like, of having to kind of go from, I don't know, like for my experience, it's like very emotional stuff, and maybe, I don't know, trying to handle the emotions when you're in the room with someone who's going through that stuff as well, and your own emotions, and because you kind of start dealing with the grief when you know things are coming, right? Like that whole
Yeah.
thing sort of starts coming on early, and then showing up in your business. Like, did you ever find that sometimes like it was sometimes a relief to maybe just be like, here's a moment where I don't have to have all those heavy emotions. This is like, it's like, hey, I just step into my past self for a moment and just get to be without the emotions. Or because like when it happened to me, I wasn't as good at dealing with my emotions. So maybe you with a coach and all of your training, maybe that was a different for you. How did that go for,
Yeah. Yeah. I think,
if you don't mind me asking, if that's what,
yeah,
if it's, yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you know, it was only afterwards and after reflecting on the whole experience, one of my friends said to me, you know what? Like, I think the way that you've handled this just goes to show like how regulated you are. Like all the work that you've done, like you said, like being a coach and also being like very into mindset and personal development. I was like, oh, hey, yeah, like I was very regulated through that process. As you said, like it, because we kind of knew it was coming, kind of to an extent. It happened much quicker than what we thought. You know, it's like, you know, it's coming, but grief is such a strange thing because it literally, like, anyone that has experienced this kind of loss will know that it really just like comes in waves. So it was almost like, you know, in that first stages, I was kind of like handling it, and then, you know, it was like a month, 6 months, 6 weeks later, it really would just hit me again, and it would be like reliving the whole thing. And I was like literally just in, I know, like my birthday was about a month after, and not having him like here for my birthday, like I was just ugly crying in my bed for like hours on my birthday, just like really just like, you know, clenching my jaw and gritting my teeth through like that experience. And that's the thing with grief, it's like you can just be okay some days. It's not like I can't think straight, I can't work on my business. It's like this has happened, but cool. I'm like, it's another day in the office, I'm working. And then there'll be like a random moment, like you'll hear, it sounds so cliche, but you'll hear a song, or you'll hear a story, or you'll see something, and suddenly you think of that person and it like consumes you. So I am I'm experiencing that, those very transient up and down emotions that will really like hit you out of nowhere. My cousin actually said to me, it's a bit of a weird analogy, but she's like, grief is like, it's such a weird analogy now that I'm saying it out loud, but she's like, it's like you walk into a kitchen and there's a hole in your kitchen, and sometimes you fall into the hole, that's the grief, and sometimes you walk into the kitchen, you see the hole, and like you just step aside, like you don't fall into the hole. Very strange
Mm,
analogy, but it made
yeah.
sense to me at the time. And that's what it is. Sometimes you fall in the grief hole, sometimes you don't. And yeah, like back to like my friend saying like you're very regulated. I think like, and this is where the courage element comes in as well. It's like I don't think we ever think that we're ready or courageous until the thing happens, because I was like, I don't think I can handle this. I can't run my business while doing this, or even if I didn't have a business, like this is just too big for me, too hard. Losing my dad, but also just the whole thing of like having to be at the hospital every day, having to share a room with my mum for 4 weeks through that process, having to see like the pain and everything, you know, it was, I didn't think I could do that, but when I was in it, I was like, wow, Helen, like you fucking really, sorry, I don't know if I can turn this podcast. You really like, you know, you really rose to the occasion. Like you stepped up and you handled it. And I was so proud of myself for that. I'd never been in a situation that has tested me so much, where I had to be like emotionally solid, physically there, energy wise, like bringing my entire focus into that situation. But also, yeah, I think it is testament to like the years and the years and years of work that I've done to regulate myself, to create that, like that emotional like safety, and also being able to like emote and be emotional as well. I'm a huge fan of crying. I love a cry. I'm not one of those people that like tries to hold back at all. And yeah, I think just like dancing with those feelings and not shaming myself if I did have those feelings, and yeah, also bringing like compassion and like kudos to myself for stepping up in the way that I did. So yeah, I guess
Yeah.
like it's an emotional roller coaster. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I just want to thank you for sharing so bravely and vulnerably about this. Yeah, I can just, I don't know. I can feel it because I went through something, similar with my dad and that kind of stuff. Although, yeah, our relationship was a bit more complicated. But still, like, I didn't have any of that whole having to show up on social media or anything like that. What sort of like, and I know for other people who maybe haven't gone through this kind of loss, there's still times where we have stuff going on personally that we don't want to share, on social media. And I know I've had conversations with people recently about that whole, how much do you share? How much don't you share? And like, do you have any, I don't know, like insights, advice, maybe practical tips if that's how your brain works
Yeah.
around like managing that and sort of deciding on that for ourselves?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as you say, like it's a deeply personal thing that's different for everyone. I think what's really interesting, and I was actually having a conversation with my coach who also was going through something in her life that she couldn't share online. She was actually pregnant, but she wasn't, you know, telling anyone like couldn't tell anyone obviously in that first 3 months, but she was pregnant and she had a really like bad first trimester. Basically was feeling like shit and like couldn't shop, but like no one knew, and she was just like dying to tell. Like she reflected on this, she won't mind me saying because she's also talked about this publicly, but she was like dying to share the what was happening behind the scenes, but obviously she couldn't because she was in that 3 month mark. So and I had a similar thing. I was like, I felt almost like a disconnect because I'm so close with my community. I wanted to share what was going on because it almost felt like, and not that I owe anyone anything or owe my, like, it's nothing like that, but it does. I think if you're on social media every day, like I've built my business on there for the last few years, it kind of feels like disingenuous or a disconnect to not show up as my whole self. And showing up as my whole authentic self is like, this is what I'm going through in my life, you know? And so for me, it felt very natural and it felt right for me to share the personal stuff. And like I said, I shared like much longer after, you know, not while I was in the hospital, not in that 4 week, 6 week period. It's about like a 2 month period total where it was like I was in the hospital for 4 to 6 weeks and then like in like arranging the funeral and things like that. And it wasn't until like 2 months later where I was like, hey, I've been a bit quiet in the last few weeks. This is what happened. And then I really, like, I overshared. I did it like a really big post of like all the details, and it was because it was for me, like I just wanted to share it, and it was like cathartic. Even having this conversation now, and like we're all going through this. Like this is most of the personal stuff that's happening to us is happening to everyone or someone on some kind of scale. Like grief and loss is literally going to happen to all of us. Like people get it, and I know like some of us might be private and you really don't want to share anything. So I think, like going back to like the tips, I think it's just like what feels good for you. Because for me, I didn't feel like I had to share or like I owed it, but I genuinely wanted to share about it, but only when it was kind of right for me, like after the fact and after I had like processed everything. But I definitely think if you're coming at it like, oh, I've got this thing in my life, should I share it? You know, should I, like, if it's the should behind it, or you know, it obviously it's not gonna like feel authentic to you.
Wow, that's a really great sort of way of looking at it of like, if it feels like a should, then the answer is probably no. Like, as
Yeah.
opposed to, if it feels, no, this might sound cliched, but aligned, or, just feels like, the time is right, you're ready. Because for all of these things, like when you put that stuff out there can be the potential of people's comments or things like that. Like, I mean, not that like for me, I get too many negative comments or anything, or not that I notice, but and I don't think you would either in your community, but it's sort of like it's on your mind a bit. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I was lucky because my community was like very supportive, and I think that's just, yeah, I don't know, I just like I it yeah, I guess it goes back to that thing of like it would have just felt weird for them not to know what was going in my life. I almost would feel, and I guess this is where it gets a little bit precarious with like business life, social media, because it would have just felt, I can't explain it in any other way, that it just would have felt very weird for this huge life altering big thing that's happened to me
Yeah.
to just, it would almost feel like I'm sweeping it under the rug or like not acknowledging it, which
Mm.
is not the case because again we don't have to share everything on social media. But it was
Mm.
like, this is such a big part of me, my life, and what I'm going through right now, and so is being online and having this community, that it would feel weird not to like speak about this. And I know a lot of people would probably disagree with that, but if you can like put up that divide, I think that's awesome as well. If that works for you, I was like, this is on my mind every day. I need to talk about it, and I also want to like share like where I've been for the last 3 weeks, because it just feels so organic to do that, you know.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Yeah, part of the reason I've been asking this is just for me, like with my chronic pain that I have, and especially recently,
Mm.
it's definitely impacted like how I've been able to show up. But like now I'm feeling a bit better. I've got some things under control. It's like, oh, okay. And so, yeah, much like you, it's like, oh, I think, I don't know, because with the chronic pain, it feels like, I could be sharing every second day that I'm in pain. And it's like, that's
Yeah.
not fun and uplifting. Like, and then, so yeah.
I think that's the thing as well. Like one of my clients asked me yesterday, she's like, I want to share my story, but like, is it okay to share the negative bits? Like, does online have to be fun and uplifting and positive? And I'm like, no, because like we're all living in a reality. Like all of us are experiencing these things. And, obviously people connect. And I think it is empowering to share these things, whether you're in it or whether like after the fact when you're feeling more ready, because at the end of the day, like there's always going to be someone that resonates with it. And I know for chronic pain, like this is something that a lot of people experience, but obviously you would know more than me, but it's like, it becomes like a default in your life where the same thing with me thinking I'm not doing anything brave, where it's just like, okay, like this is just how I show up. I just get on with it. I need to, and you kind of forget
Yeah.
just how brave and courageous it is to do that and to still show up on calls when you have that pain, when it's affecting the way that how present you are or whatever. Like it's still so brave that you're still showing up regardless, right? And I think for you might forget that it's actually a really big freaking deal because you have to live it every single day. So I think it would be quite inspiring for people to like hear that and see that, because they're going to have that same version, whatever, even if it's not chronic pain, that they're also going through as well, that maybe they just think is a normal everyday thing for them, but is actually, yeah, a pretty big thing in their life.
My gosh, thank you for that. That's such an amazing perspective. And I think that's just the value of being able to chat with people about this stuff and having the outside perspective. Because, like you said, you just get so in it, and it's like, oh, this is just how I function. This is what I do. And then it's like somebody goes, oh, that's actually pretty brave or pretty remarkable. It's like, oh, yeah, it is, isn't it? And yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about what you have been doing now in your business in terms of brave things. I'd like to shift back to maybe like a time when you were getting started. I don't know if you want to talk about going from corporate into consulting, or if you want to go from consulting into coaching. But yeah, like what are
Yeah.
some brave things that you had to do, or maybe some brave mindset shifts or things like that that you had to contend with to perhaps, get into what you're doing now. And yeah.
Yeah, so many mindset shifts. I think starting business in and of itself was the biggest, scariest thing that I've ever done. Like it's the biggest leap. I, started off, as I shared, like having that corporate experience. And when I decided to go into business, it was actually, a friend that had suggested it. Use the experience that you already have rather than getting paid by a company to do social media. Why don't you do it for yourself? Have your own clients, have the freedom, flexibility, and make more money doing it. And I just thought it made so much sense. But at the time, I was, 23, 24, living in London, living in a very expensive city. And I think the bravest thing that I did was actually go into business when it didn't seem like the best time to do it. And I think, and what I mean by that is from a financial perspective. And I want to share this because I think, obviously taking the leap and going all into business from a corporate, if you're working in corporate, the financial aspect is probably like the biggest thing on your mind. It's like, can I make it work? Will I be able to like match my corporate salary, or like will I be able to like pay my bills, pay my rent, pay my mortgage? I think that's one of the biggest things that stops people from going all in, is not feeling financially ready. But I actually went into business, and I'm not telling anyone else to do this, but I'm sharing it from the perspective of like, you can really do anything, not to sound like you can do anything if you put your mind to it, but like you can kind of get resourceful and you can make it work, And when I started my business at the time, because I was living in a really expensive city, I was really young, was like really silly with my money. I was actually in 13,000 euros of credit card debt, which is a lot. Like that is a lot of, for any Australian listener, it's like over 20, it's a
Over
lot of credit
20,000.
card debt for like a young person. Yeah. And I was just really bad with my money, like when I was young, obviously like had moved overseas, all of this stuff. And so it really wasn't on paper a good time to start my business. And I know a lot of people do go into like intentional debt to start their businesses, like they invest in, like coaching or like growing their skills, a certification, and all of that. So there is that element. But for me, it was just like, if this doesn't work, I it's going to be difficult, So I think a really brave thing that I did is just, I took a chance on myself, and I really had that mindset of like, you need to make it work. There is no other way. You're 13K in credit card debt. Like, you literally can't go into any more debt. You don't know if business is going to work. The thing that kept me going was the belief I had in myself. And that's why I'm not just a business coach, I'm a mindset coach, because I think building that self-confidence, that inner belief, and like that trust in yourself that you can make it work is just foundation. It's like the cornerstone of your business and the mindset work that you do to allow it to happen and to build it, right? So yeah, like for me, it was just like, let's just do it. I was in that debt, but I'd saved like a super small pot along the side of that. Before I left corporate, I actually got a few clients, like 2 or 3 clients on the side of corporate. So I was in a marketing role, I was doing social media. So I just, in the last like 6 months of being in my corporate role, I acquired 2 to 3 social media retainers that I could do. And these were like really small businesses. Like one was like a wine brand, one was like a travel app, another one was like a smoothie app. They were paying me about like 500 to 1,000 a month retain, not enough to like live off, not certainly not enough to pay my debt. But like before I left corporate, I had like I had like a little bit of money coming in, and I was like, cool, like as long as I've got that couple of K coming in to like cover my bare expenses, when I leave corporate, I can obviously like grow it from there and add more when I've got that capacity and free time. And then luckily so that was like the biggest mindset thing for me. And then luckily what happened from there is like, I think when you're going into business in the online space, like people oversimplify this whole like, leave your corporate and then like make 6 figures in 12 months and you'll be fine. Like, but you have to actually be a little bit strategic to make money in your business. And for me, the money maker wasn't actually the business that I had started. The money maker was like me utilizing the skills I'd learned in corporate and leveraging other kind of income portals. So something that I did, which you can do obviously if you have a marketing background or HR, but depending on what you did in your working life, was, I started freelancing for other agencies. So I had my business and I was building my own client base, which was giving me the peanuts, like the 500 to 1,000 a month or whatever. But then, 2 or 3 months in, I'd get like a 2 or 3 month freelance gig from an advertising agency where I was getting an amazing day rate, and that would give me my like cash injection. So I was leveraging like other ways to make money. It was still technically my business, like freelancer, self-employed, but obviously you're still figuring out business development, you're still figuring out sales and marketing in a different way for your business. So like obviously leveraging any other income portals that you have and other opportunities is something that you can do. And I think for when I talk to people looking to take the leap into business, I'm always like, yes, obviously save your financial runway if you can. I didn't have that, but if you can, save the 6 month or 12-month emergency fund. Yes, maybe get some clients up and only go all in with your business if you've matched your corporate salary or whatever. But for most people, that's really hard to do. Like, saving a year's worth of savings when you probably have other expenses and other things you're saving for, that can be challenging. Also, building your business up to the point where you've got a full roster of clients and you're matching your corporate salary can be really hard if you're working full time, because like, who has the time to do that? I know amazing people do, but like for me, that didn't work for my energy, right? So it was like, okay, how else can I build that? So yeah, that was kind of like what I navigated in terms of like mindset wise. And luckily for me, mindset wise, and in terms of like the practical element, and lucky for me, 18 months into my business, I was able to pay off that debt. So like that, it was like a huge plot twist for me, because at the time in London, my salary, like it was like nearly 10 years ago, I was earning like 45,000 quid or something. I would have just kept going into debt. Had I stayed in that job and had I have got a promotion and another promotion, like, 2K extra a
Mm.
year, 5K extra a year, I literally would have stayed in that 13K debt, and that debt would have grown. But because I took a chance and because I started my business and my business made way more money than what that corporate salary was at the time, I was able to pay that debt off. So like I think yeah, it's like taking a chance, and I never want people to go into debt or like take these risks that don't feel good in business, but at the same time I do think there is this element of like entrepreneurship is risky. Like it's risky. Like the definition of entrepreneurship when you look it up might be a bit outdated and maybe not applicable to like the kind of people we work with, but an entrepreneur is like someone that will actually risk funds to make more funds. That's what an entrepreneur is. To be entrepreneurial is like you're
Yeah.
investing in stuff when you don't know
Mm.
if it works. But like
Yeah.
this is why people are, entrepreneurs, they start up startups and like whatever. They don't know if it's gonna work, but they're putting all the capital into it. So I do actually think that like if you're navigating like this fear of starting business because of money, I'm like, well, welcome to entrepreneurship because like this is the uncertainty of it. And even if you do make lots of money in the first year or two, that isn't certain either. Like the whole thing is quote unquote risky, I guess, compared to having a steady 9 to 5 paycheck. But as we know in this day and age,
Yeah.
that is also risky. You could lose your job or like the
Yeah.
industries could change. And so I think it's like rewiring what our idea of like uncertainty and risk is. Because yeah, I do think like you might always have that level of uncertainty, but like it's worth it. And that level of certainty may also exist if you have like that stable 9 to 5, but you're just not conditioned to see it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, like, I know you said, like, talked about the nest egg or the runway of money, but I think, like, perhaps, like, in your situation, you had like the nest egg or runway of skills, right, in sales and
Mm,
marketing. And
yeah.
so, like, oftentimes where I've seen people leave their corporate without the financial runway, usually if you look back, they've got a bunch of sale and then like they land successfully in the first 6 to 12 months. They have a
Totally.
background in sales, they have a background in marketing,
Yeah.
and they also have like the level of confidence, like you said, that there's uncertainty. But the thing is like the people who are really successful are the ones who decide they're going to make it work, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
hey, this how might not be the right how, but it's like, I'm going to make it work. This is the business. And the decision comes first for those of us
Yeah.
who are a bit into the uncertainty side of things, right?
Totally. I love the quote, like ready is a decision, not a feeling. Because we're never going to feel ready. You have to decide I'm ready and I'm gonna be ready and I'm gonna make it happen. And I think you make a really good point about having, you're either you're leveraging money or a runway if you have that, or you're leveraging your existing skills. And I think that's a really important message for people that perhaps tend to compare themselves to other business owners. Like I work with coaches every day. It's like, why, it's like they want the 6 figures in 6 months to 12 months. And it's like the people that you're looking at, like you have no idea, like you can't compare apples to apples because like you have no idea like the skills that they've had or even like the privilege as well, right? Like people come from different, some people live in like more affordable cities, or some people, even if they don't get money from their parents and never got that, maybe they have that psychological safety to know if they were in trouble they would have that. And I'm not like judging that or anything. It's just like everyone literally comes from like different walks of life and different privileges in that sense. And I think for me, having the marketing background, starting business, of course, was a privilege. So like when people compare, but you've come this far in business, I'm like, but I already had, before I started my coaching business, like at that point it was like 5 or 6 years of marketing experience before that, and I'd started a business before my coaching business. So you really can't compare my success to someone else who maybe doesn't have that. So yeah, I think that's really definitely a really important factor to take into account, particularly when you're looking at other people and saying, "Oh, how come I'm not where perhaps that person is," and so on.
Yeah, yeah. And definitely, I think in some of those cases too, if you start looking at, I mean, I don't encourage anybody to compare, right? That doesn't help us, but we all have our own journeys and whatnot. But it's like when you sit there and kind of go, oh, I wonder why I haven't made it there yet. For me, like I found like that's where the mindset stuff came in because like
Mm,
believe me, if it could have been a marketing strategy of some kind, I would have made that work because I tried dozens of them, and
Mm.
had experience and all that. For me, it was that mindset side that really held me back, like the confidence, like the deciding that I'm going to make it work and not waiting for other people outside to validate that it will work, and yeah, some of that stuff. So
I
yeah.
think that's the hardest thing in business is finding how to validate yourself and reassure yourself, because I think that's, for me, that's biggest mindset shifts is like when you work in the corporate world, or not just the corporate world, any kind of 9 to 5, you're consistently getting validation and feedback from, cool, you've got performance reviews, or you've got your manager, or you've got, your whatever KPI, like all the things where your how you're doing and how you're performing happens in like a structured way. But in business, you're doing it on your own, and you've got to like give yourself permission to do things. You've got to sense check yourself. You've got to like give yourself your own validation that, like, okay, what I'm doing, it's going to work. If it doesn't, that's okay. I can pivot. Like, you've literally got to keep telling yourself these things. And I think this is where like we get really caught up and addicted to social media, because sometimes we look to social media for the validation, which is not always like the most healthiest thing, but it makes so much sense that we do, right? Because we don't have a manager being like, cool, you're doing a great job, or a client, in the typical kind of corporate sense, that's like happy with the work. Like, it's like in business, it's just you. So you got to learn to give yourself that, your own validation, your own pat on the back. So many entrepreneurs literally don't celebrate themselves enough. Like, it's such a basic thing. It's so, it sounds again like very cliche, like celebrate your wins, but like you literally need to continuously take stock of what you're doing and say like, hey, I'm doing a good job here, or I'm putting in a lot of effort. Like, extending that like celebration and self-compassion to yourself, because no one else is going to do it. Like, no one else is going to do it. And so, yeah, I think like that's just a huge, huge part of it as well, being able to give that to yourself.
My gosh, yeah, absolutely. And definitely some of the skills that it's taken me the longest to learn was that whole like self-validation. And I definitely like I needed coaches like yourself to really help with that stuff too.
And I think it's okay. Like, I say to my coach all the time, I'm like, okay, I think it's okay as long as you've got the awareness of it. Like, I'll say to my coach,
Yeah.
all right, like, okay, I have this idea, and really what I just need from you is some validation and permission. And like, we giggle about it. And I'm like, I obviously try and give it to myself as well, but I'm also human. And I'm like, hey, you as my mentor, who's a couple of steps ahead, can you just like sense check this to me? And that's where a coach or mentor can be really helpful as well. But I think it's important to know when you're coming in from that space of being like, I'm looking for the reassurance, rather than constantly like clutching for the external seeking, like, I think it's quite empowered if you know that that's just what you need, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think when there's been times for me when I haven't known that, especially like in the very beginning of wanting to start a business, and this is like in my early 20s, and it's like I'd be excited, I'd have an idea, and I'd like talk to the wrong person, and that person would just be like,
Mm,
here's all the negatives, because they're not even an entrepreneur or a business owner, and they're like, why would you do that? No, 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 this, all the fear. And
yeah,
yeah, and so it's
totally.
like can be really helpful to know. It's like, hey, actually, I'm coming to you with this idea, but I kind of just need you to be like, yes, let's do this.
Yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah. I think that's just another important thing as well, is like listening to the right people. Obviously, we know like even if your friends are well meaning, they might not understand. I had a client the other day share, she's going through this new season of her business where she's really like stepping up, being brave, being courageous, and actually just like really getting out there and selling her offer, shouting it from the rooftops. And she said that one of her good friends like made the comment of like, oh, you are selling quite a lot. And you know how hard it is, like when you're first starting to sell, it feels weird, it feels icky, it feels like, and so to have a friend to be like, oh, I've noticed that, and she just suddenly was like, oh God, everyone thinks I'm selling too much. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I'm like, your friend you sees you usually in a normal context when you're showing up on Instagram, on your personal Instagram, as yourself, where you're not selling things. So
Mm,
obviously on your business profile, suddenly you're like selling,
yeah.
and you're being bold with that. Obviously she's going to see it as jarring, and I'm like, let's just reframe it. It's not a bad thing. Like, of course, to her you're selling more, but like it's
Mm,
of course you're going to be selling on your business account. Like, you're not going to be selling on your personal account. You got nothing to sell, like, so I think
Yeah.
it's just like reframing and just like knowing like when these thoughts, I think I actually heard, I was listening to one of your podcasts yesterday, and you mentioned like being once so excited about a launch, and then someone had just had this little comment about like it being like a tight launch or something, tight timings, and you were like, suddenly you were just, you spiraled, and you were like, okay, I can't do this launch or whatever it was, like whatever thing you were putting out. And it's true, it's like sometimes that one little comment that someone
Mm.
makes can like just really derail you. And I think again it comes back to this piece about giving yourself the own validation, and that includes kind of like tuning out the noise and being like, cool, this person has said that, do I actually want to listen to that? Like, is that useful to me? Do I actually believe what they're saying? Or, even if it's like a well-meaning comment.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, that ability, that discernment. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'd love to talk to you about like what brave things do you have coming up in the next few months? Things you might be working outside of your comfort zone on, cool things that are coming. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, there are so many things, Tiff, that I would love to start a podcast. So that is like a huge thing on the horizon for
Oh,
me. And
yes.
yeah, I
Oh,
know, I know, yes. If we get enough downloads on this episode, I'll do it. Well, yeah, that would be a big one. And I think the fear, a lot of, and as you know as well, like the fear that holds me back from that is my past experiences of burnout. Like the fear of like, can I commit to a podcast? Because it is so, in my eyes, I don't know, because I haven't done it yet, but in my eyes, it feels like a lot of work because it's editing, it's getting guests, it's like showing up every week in this episodic kind of format. So my fear is the fear of commitment. It's the fear of like, if I invest in this time, energy, resources, and I commit, like how much work is that going to be? And that's not because I don't like hard work. It's just like that
mm,
burnout and that fear of like overdoing it is so like deeply ingrained in me. So I think it's a really interesting thing to reflect on, like just how past experiences, even if you've worked through it, even if you've learned from it, still show up. So I think that's definitely one thing, like getting a podcast out there. Another one is just like, I've been in business for 6 years now and full time, and I'm always thinking about the next business idea and what the next thing will be. And like, I love business coaching so much. Like, people always ask that question, like, if you were to do something and not get paid, like, what would you do? I would literally coach. So, like, if I had, $1 million in the bank right now, I would be pro
mm,
bono coaching people all the time, even if I didn't have to, because I freaking love it so much. So it's like, I will
yeah.
always be a business coach. I'll always have this skill of being able to coach someone. But now I'm like, is there another entrepreneurial idea that I'd love to do, like in tandem to this, or like grow into the bigger, like 10-year, 5, 10-year vision? I don't know what it is yet, but it could be anything, like a brick and mortar, like a physical space. Like, I really love cafes and co-working spaces. I really love like wellness studios and wellness spas. So I'm like, could I just create something that is so left of field to what I do now, but put my business skills to the test? And for me, that is really like, it's brave because it's new and it's scary and exciting. But I think like, yeah, like just, I don't know, I've been doing what I've been doing so long now that like kind of changing the frame and going, being like, cool, what is that new dream? What could that be? Yeah, is like probably the big thing on the horizon for me. Not happening anytime soon because I need to figure out what that idea is. It's something that would either be to do with like helping people with wealth, health, or self, as I say. That's the only idea I have for now. Yeah, I think that's the next thing on the horizon.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I love that. And as you were talking, I came up with like about 10 different ideas. I was like, oh, hey, you could do this or do that. And yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah, love it. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the thing is entrepreneurs. Where it's just like, if you're an entrepreneur, if you got that spirit, like
Yeah.
you can create any, businesses as long as you kind of plan for it and yeah, get
Mm,
over the mindset that stuff, as we said.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for all of your time. This time has flown by,
Of
and just to thank you so much. Do you have
course.
any, and I know this is kind of putting you on the spot, but any like last words or, hey, if you just take one thing from this podcast, here's what I'd want you to know, or something like that. I'm kind of talking a bit to give you a chance to maybe think about this. Because I know this wasn't part of the planned questions, but yeah, I've had this thrown at me on some podcasts and I thought, oh, this could be a good way to finish up.
Yeah, I think like something you should know, and like, I don't know, if you're facing something that is challenging, that requires you to be a little bit brave and a little bit courageous. I think like one of the most useful things that I heard around this topic is just like, you know, you're capable, right? Always remember that you're capable, and the version of you that can handle hard things is born in the moment that you have to face the hard things. And I think like for me and my experience, my dad, like I said, like I had never had an experience like that. I wouldn't have in any, I never would have thought that I would show up in the way that I did. But when I was faced with that situation, I showed the hell up, right? So I think it's like, yeah, this idea of like, sometimes your mind tells you that you can't. Your mind is constantly trying to protect you and telling you all the things that you cannot do. And maybe you can't do them right now, but in that moment when you are faced with that challenge and you do actually have to do the thing, guess freaking what? Like, you will be able to do it and you will rise to the occasion. So I think it's like, remember that you're capable, and remember that no matter what it is, you will bloody rise to the occasion because you're freaking amazing. So yeah, I think that's really comforting to know. Like, even if you're scared shitless right now, even if you think you can't do it, just trust that you will be able to do it when the time comes.
My gosh, I love that. Oh, so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So, last thing, we will of course have links to all of your stuff in the show notes. But for those people who are like me, who are like, I don't want to look at the show notes, just tell me now and I will
Yeah.
go find you. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I hang out mostly on Instagram. So you can find me at underscore Helen Kartika underscore. That's Helen Kartika. That's how you spell my last name. And yeah, if you follow me on Instagram, then you can find all my links to all the other stuff from there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing so vulnerably and just inspiring us with your stories of business bravery.
Of course, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Business Bravery podcast. Has this episode inspired you to do something brave? Even if it's only send a difficult email, please share it with me on Instagram or other social media channels. Feel free to tag me at Tiffany G Studios. That's TIFFANY. G for golf, STUDIOS, no spaces, no underscores, etc. Or you can use the hashtag Business Bravery Podcast so that I can cheer you on, and together we can inspire other coaches and course creators to do brave things in their business and life. Now, I'm Tiffany, and I'll leave you with this one last thing. What's one brave thing you're going to do today? It doesn't have to be big. Even the smallest steps can create the most massive results. So again, feel free to share it with me either publicly or privately so that I can cheer you on. That's it from me. Until next time, bye for now.